Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, first of all, I'm Gunjan Syal. I'm Transformation Executive at Emerald Technology Group Inc. I offer strategy, governance, and program management services to clients on their transformation needs. Today, with me, I have Simon News, who's the Power BI guru. So, Simon, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi guys, my name's Simon Nuss. According to Gunjan, I'm a Power BI guru. I've been using this tool for about 8 years now. I'm the Director of Data and Analytics for a Canadian investment fund. I'm also the moderator of the Power BI subreddit. I've been on the Power BI World Tour quite a few times, and I'm one of the top SMEs in Canada.
Wonderful. Thank you, Simon. So today we thought we'll do this workshop. There's a lot of conversation these days about COVID-19 and how can we stay up to date with all this data that's being thrown at us. So Simon and I had this conversation about how we're staying on top of the public data that's being made available to us and how can we distill that using Power BI to a dashboard that we can use for our own needs. So that's the focus of the workshop today. Simon, anything to add to that before we get into the meat of it?
No, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. We're going to pull from a public data source and in the next 40 minutes or so, create a Power BI dashboard on top of that.
Yes, and I would encourage everybody that's watching us to join in the conversation. If you have any questions, please use the comments feature to let us know what else you would like to hear about, or if you would like to go into a little bit more detail with what Simon is sharing with you, please feel free to ask us. So Simon, essentially over to you at this point. I will add your screen to the stream. There we go.
Sure.
And over to you.
Okay, so Gunjan, just to confirm, you should be able to see a Power BI dashboard on your screen.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, guys. So today, what we're going to do, we're going to make a Power BI dashboard. What we're going to do, we're going to use the COVID-19 data that I found on GitHub from the Johns Hopkins data source, and we're going to use Power BI Desktop. So this will be a very fast-paced sort of masterclass in Power BI development. I'm effectively going to be cramming about 8 years of experience into a 45-minute time slot, okay? So it will be very fast-paced. I would almost consider it an intermediate level demo. So it's not going to be drag and drop. We're going to take it a bit more complex than that. We're going to use a couple of functions, so probably about 10 different functions in this tool. So it's not beginner, it's not advanced, it's kind of that mid-range sort of mark. So I'd say the target audience are more like your analysts or people interested in using Power BI to create reports. The expectation is really to obviously learn during the live demo, but later on replay the video in your own time to be able to see how I did certain things. So as Gunjan mentioned, please ask questions in the chat and I'll try my best to answer them at the end of each segment. So there are 4 segments. I'm going to begin with a Power BI desktop introduction, followed by data transformation, so bringing in that data. Then we're going to do a little bit of data modeling. And finally, we'll spend the last probably 10, 15 minutes actually creating the report. And so that's adding in business semantics using the Power BI language called DAX, and then doing a little bit of information design. So making the report pretty, make sure that it communicates the correct story. If you get lost at any point in time, for example, if you get lost during the data transformation segment, you have the opportunity to kind of reset once that segment is finished. So don't worry, if you're lost during the presentation, you can pick it up at the next segment. And I will also try to cover quite a few best practices in this demo. I may not have time to explain why they're best practices, but I'll try my best. And a lot of this material, including the report that you should be able to see on the screen right now, will be provided after this. I think Gunjan's going to forward the storage details, or if she hasn't already, she'll forward them shortly. So before I start, just to reiterate, this is kind of like a Gordon Ramsay cooking video, but for Power BI. So it will be quite fast. You will see a lot in this short time. But the idea is that obviously, just like with cooking, you go back to the video when you're about to make your meal. So when you're about to make a report and dive into Power BI, you can refer to this video again to see how I did certain things. All right, so let's start with the challenge. So on my screen right now, you should be able to see the Power BI report. This is the point that we want to get to. And what we have to start with is some data from the Johns Hopkins GitHub. So I'm going to begin by showing you the raw data. So this is the GitHub link here. And as you can see, it's the novel coronavirus COVID-19 data repository for the Johns Hopkins CSSE. And we're going to go to the folder that contains all of the data. I think it's in this one here. And this is what we're starting with. So we're starting with effectively a whole bunch of CSV or text files. And we somehow need to turn all of that into this. And we've got 45 minutes to do it. So let's get started. What I'll begin by discussing is Power BI, just in general. So what is Power BI? Power BI is effectively a reporting and analysis suite of tools. So on the left, you see on my screen here, I'll make this a bit bigger. This is Power BI Desktop. This is a tool that you can download on your local machine. It's 100% free, no licensing issues at all. You can download it and use this in your own time. Also under the umbrella of Power BI is something called Power BI Report Builder that allows you to make the old school paginated reports. And there is also the big boy, the Power BI service. And that's kind of the online cloud service that supports and shares and acts as like a hub for all Power BI storage and reports. And there's also a whole bunch of third-party tools as well, right? So developers and people in the community have contributed a lot of really powerful third-party tools that enhance the developer's experience. For example, Tabular Editor, VertiPack Analyzer, DAX Studio. These are tools that are used by developers to help develop Power BI reports beyond the scope of just Power BI Desktop. So what is Power BI Desktop, this tool that you see on the left? As I mentioned, 100% free. You can download it right now, no licensing issues. It's actually the conglomeration of other tools that Microsoft had already made prior to 2015. So it's the merging of a tool called Power Query. Those Excel users, those Power Excel users will know what that tool is. It's probably the most powerful feature in Excel beside pivot tables. So Microsoft took that Power Query engine from Excel and moved it into Power BI in 2015. They also took another feature from Excel called Power Pivot, and that's basically a pivot table on steroids. So they also took that from Excel as well, and in 2015 merged it into this product that we see here called Power BI. And then they layered on a third sort of tool, I guess you could call it, and that's the visualization experience. And so these three, I guess, tools together effectively make up Power BI. We use Power Query for data transformation, the Power BI Power Pivot engine for our aggregations and our calculations. And then finally, we bring that all together by visualizing them on a canvas and telling a story. So the order of events that I'm about to show you in this demo can be applied to many things, not just Power BI development. For example, if someone hands you an existing Power BI report, you'd likely still go through the same linear series of events. We'll start with Power Query, make sure that the data is transformed correctly. We'll do a bit of data modeling. Then we'll have a look at the DAX calculations that I mentioned before. And finally, we'd have a look at the visualizations. So this order of events of this demo is very standard for Power BI. In fact, anytime I'm doing optimization, enhancements, or troubleshooting, I usually start at the beginning and go through these series of events in order. So Gunjan, I'm going to pause there for a second. Are there any questions so far on what is Power BI Desktop or Power BI in general?
No, Simon, we're good so far. Please keep
Excellent.
going.
Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to drag this to my other screen because we may need to refer to it later. And I'm going to open up a mostly blank Power BI file that I've already prepared on my desktop. So I'll give this a few seconds to load. So what I've done is I've created a Power BI desktop file that has what's called a date table in it. So it already comes pre-made with a little bit of data. And these dates, almost every article you'll read online or every tutorial has a date table in it. And so this is mine that I'm about to show you in a second. I guess every developer has their own date table. This one you'll receive after this meeting from Gunjan's storage account, and you can use it for your own analysis. All right, it's almost loaded. So here we have a mostly blank Power BI file. Now what we see in the middle are some pre-made, like a canvas, so some blank storage blocks for me to drag my visuals. On the right, we have my date table, and on the right as well, we have some visuals that you can select. So I'll go into detail on this date table a little, later during this presentation, but for now, let's just get into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to load up the GitHub here on the right, and one moment. And so what we're going to do, our goal for the first segment is data transformation. We want to be able to get all of these CSVs into Power BI. And so I'm just going to click on one of these, and we'll have a look in my web browser just to show you what we're dealing with. So I'll click on the CSV, and I'll click on View Raw. So here's all the data. It's a whole bunch of COVID-19 data. It's got confirmed cases, deaths, and recovered by country and state. So we want all of that data, not just from that one CSV though. We actually want it from all of these CSV files. So let's do that. So I'm going to click on Get Data, which is the Power Query Get Data experience, and I'm going to pull from a website. I'm going to pull from a website. One minute. Just getting something ready on the other screen so I can follow along. So it's prompting me right now to put in the URL of the website. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the web browser, I'm going to copy this and paste it into Power BI. And so what it's doing right now is it's going to that website and seeing what data is available. And this screen here basically is a menu of items. And as we can see, the second one here called Files is effectively what I'm after. I'm after a list of CSV files because I'm going to use these as a data source. So I'm going to click that tick box. Now, instead of loading this to Power BI, I'm going to click Transform Data. In fact, almost every time you make a Power BI report, you never click Load on the screen. You almost always click Transform Data. And I've just clicked that. The reason is we want to make sure that our data is correct, right? There's no point connecting to any data source and just bringing it in. You always have to massage the data. Okay, and now what we can see here is the Power Query screen. This is exactly the same as you would see it inside Excel. And I'll just spend a couple of seconds just going over what we're looking at. So this tool here inside Power BI is a data transformation tool. I can't actually edit any of the data like you can in Excel. The only way I can edit or transform this data is by clicking on a button. And so what do we have? Up the top here in the ribbon, we have a whole bunch of data transformation things like pivoting, we have reversing rows, group bys. Effectively, every button you see will transform the data somehow. On the left, we have a list of all the data sources I've connected to, or the tables that I've made. In this case, it's just one. In the middle is a preview screen of my data. And most importantly, I would say on the right is the steps that I've applied so far. And it's been kind enough to automatically add a couple of steps for me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this last step just because it's not needed. Now, let's get started. So to begin with, what I'd like to do is I'm only interested in this one column here called name. So I'm going to right click this column and say remove all other columns. And over the space of the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be clicking on a few buttons. And as you can see here on the right, with every button that I click, it's going to add a new step. So this is going to once again be quite fast-paced. So bear with me on this. If you have any questions as I'm going through this data transformation step, please write them in the chat. So I've removed
Actually,
the other
Simon,
column.
sorry to interrupt. There are a couple of questions already.
Sure.
There is one from Vineet, and he is looking for, is there a web version of Power BI? And I wonder if my PC would support it.
So Power BI Desktop is only supported on PCs, not supported on Mac, although there are 3 options you can have to install it on Mac. I don't have those off the top of my head, but I can forward those applications to you later. There is a Power BI engine in the cloud, but you don't use it for development. The only tool you use for Power BI development currently is the Power BI Desktop version that's client-sided.
Great. The second question is from Vicky, and she is looking for what data sources can Power BI connect to?
Yeah, so effectively everything and anything. There is a large list of supported data sources, so I'll show you. I'll give this a few seconds. So here, I'm just going to scroll slowly. Here is just a list of the default supported data sources. Most importantly in here are OData Feed, which means you can connect to a lot of Microsoft ones. Web, you can connect to a lot of websites. There is also OLEDB and ODBC, which means you can connect to pretty much anything. And a whole bunch of other data sources as well. And you can also make custom connectors, so net new data sources from scratch.
Wonderful. Thank you.
No worries. So what I'd like to do here is I want to make another column. I want to add a column to this data set that just gives me date. So I'm going to click Add Column. And in this case here, instead of adding a column and writing a formula, I'm going to let Power BI make the formula for me. So I'm going to click Add Column from Example. And in the screen here, it's just prompting me to give examples of what I would like. And this is actually an AI engine here, like an actual AI engine that they've built into this tool. So I'm just going to say, this is what I want somewhere from this column. I'm giving it an example of what I want. I'm just going to press enter. And as we can see, it's actually gone, okay, well, he wants those characters there. Those characters exist before this full stop. Therefore, for the rest of this data, he wants everything before the full stop or the period. And as you can see up the top, that's what it's done. It's actually automatically made the formula for me. Long gone are the days in Excel where you do left, right, mid, length, all of that headache stuff. Now it's very simple. You just give it an example and it automatically makes the formula and passes out the text for you. So I'm going to give this a name. We'll call it date, and I'll press enter and press OK. As we can see, there's a new step added on the right, and we have a new column here. So the next step is I'm only interested in rows that have CSV in it. So I'm going to filter. I'm going to remove rows. And I'm only going to keep rows that contain .csv. So in this case here, filter rows where it contains .csv and press OK. Once again, we get a new step. Now, what I'd like to do is really get a list of URLs. So a list of URLs for each of these CSVs. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here. On my clipboard, I already have that URL. So I'm just going to go to Notepad and paste that in. So the URL for a CSV is effectively, if I copy this, that. So I'm going to add a third column that basically makes this string for me. So I'm going to click here, and there's an option called custom column. So I'm going to add a custom column. And in this case here, I'm going to call the new column that I'm adding URL. And I'm going to say, well, it's actually the combination of this text string and name. So the text string that I pasted in and this column called name. And I'm going to press OK. And as we can see right here, when I click on a cell, I get a little preview of that cell down the bottom here. And let's just click on this one at random. We see that the CSV link is made for me. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard. I'm going to go to my web browser, paste that in, and just confirm that, correct, I am receiving CSV data from that URL. Okay, the next step, this is where we get quite advanced. So what I want to actually do is add a fourth column that goes to that URL and gets me the data. So let's repeat what I did last time. I'm going to add a custom column, and this one I'm going to call CSV. And what I'm going to say to Power BI is I'm going to say, give me the web context of that URL. So this is a function that I'm running in this Power Query tool. So give me the web contents of this column. I'm going to press OK. And what we see is a whole bunch of, it's a column full of binary, and that's not useful to me. Binary is just ones and zeros. So I need to be a bit more, I need to tell the Power Query tool a bit more about the data that it's trying to connect to. It doesn't know that it's a CSV. I need to tell it that it's a CSV. So I'm going to go to my step here on the right, and I'm going to edit it. So it's very easy to edit an existing step. You see the little cog here? I'm just going to click that, and out will pop that same window that we saw before. So I'm going to wrap this in another function that says, sure, thanks for returning the binary to me, but it's actually a CSV document that I want you to interpret it as. And so that's what we're doing. We're taking that binary that this function returned, as you see in the background, and we're saying, well, turn that into a CSV document. And I'll press OK. And now when I click on the little white space in the cell, down the bottom, you'll get a preview of that table. There we go. So in the cell here is a table. A bit strange, I get it, but bear with me. And in fact, I can click on any of these, and this, for this particular date, we get all of that data. So the next step I'd like to do is clean this up a little bit. As you can see, the first row of data is not really data, it's actually the header for that table. See where it says last update? That should be where column 3 is. So I'm going to add another column that promotes that first row to the header of each table. And by the way, I know this seems quite advanced, but this sort of approach that I'm using can be used in many different scenarios. For example, reading files from a folder. You can read 1,000 files from a folder by using this methodology within 5 minutes of work. It's a very powerful tool. So I'm going to add a fifth column right now that promotes this first row to the header. So I'm going to add, once again, a custom column, and I'm going to call this headers. And I'm going to type in another function name, table.promoteHeaders. Now, it's worth noting that you don't need to know these functions to use this tool. I only use these functions because I'm experienced. I know these from using this tool for about 7 years. Clicking the buttons gets you the same functions. So you don't even really need to know these functions. You can get the same net result by clicking buttons. But I wanted to make this demo a little bit more complex. And I wanted to show you that the tool has a capability to actually have this sort of functionality in it, just like Excel has functions. You know, I'm not going to teach Excel without teaching formulas, right? Just like I'm not going to teach Power Query without teaching these functions.
Actually, Simon, if I can interject for a second, there are a couple more questions that just came in. So the first one is, apart from CSV file, which other file types are friendly with Power BI? And this question comes from Bhavesh.
Effectively, any. I might actually answer that and say what's not effective with Power BI. It's much easier to answer, and that is Parquet files or ORC files or Delta Lake files. Some zip files as well. So everything else you're good for. Yeah.
Great. And the other question Bhavesh has is, can we view an ERP integrated data on a Power BI mobile app?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. So you can view any data on a mobile app, regardless of its data source. Yeah, you can do that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. So now when I click in the white space of this newly created column, we see that the data actually looks quite clean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove a few columns and only keep the ones that I'm interested in. So I'm interested in keeping the URL because that keeps my data lineage, so I know where the file came from. I'm interested in date because date, and I'm interested in this last column that I made. So it's interesting to note that I'm highlighting these columns by holding down Control and clicking them in a certain order. And so I'm going to right click and say remove every other column. Now what's interesting is that when I click this, it remembered the order that I clicked on those columns. I clicked URL first, then date, then promote headers. So a neat little feature there. In fact, this tool has a lot of those cool little UX features that make it a treat to use. So the next step is where the magic happens. But before I do that, I'm actually going to remove, funnily enough, this last piece of data here. This is yesterday's data from the 23rd. And what's kind of funny is that because I'm pulling from GitHub, someone had actually uploaded incorrect data on GitHub yesterday. Live demo, what can you do? As we can see, this last piece of data here from the 23rd, which is yesterday, has columns called tips, admin to, etc., etc. But if I go to any other data source, it does not have those columns. So for the purposes of today's demo, I'm just going to remove this row just because it contains buggy data. An issue has been logged on GitHub and someone's working on it right now. So I'm just going to remove that. So I'm going to add a filter that removes that last step. So now the magic part. So this is where Power BI or Power Query really shines. I'm going to click these two little arrows up here and it's going to explode that data. It's going to expand it. So when I click that, I'm going to say load more. So just give me all the columns. And I'm going to untick use the original name. And once I press OK, we see the magic. And what we have here, if I just scroll down, is all of the data stacked on top of each other in one neat table. So I could pause there. I'm pretty happy with this data. It's effectively what I want. But there is something else that's a bit hard to see, but there's some problems with this data. So if I filter to Australia, we'll see that problem. So I'm going to select Australia, and I'll pick good old Queensland, where I grew up. And the challenge is this. For example, if we look at the confirmed data, it's actually incremental. It's not, for example, we pick the 18th. 94 cases did not happen on the 18th. What it's saying is that lifetime to date, there were 94 cases. This is not very good data for into what actually happened on that day, which when you think about it is actually 94 minus 78, the previous day. For analytics, you're not really interested in incremental data like this. You're interested in the facts. Right. You can create incremental data from the facts. So I want to turn that 94 into the cases that occurred on that date. So the next few steps I'm going to go over quite quickly because there's about 6 or 7 steps. I don't want to go into detail in it, but you can replay them back. Effectively, net, that 94 is going to turn into the new cases for that day. And same for deaths, and same for recovered. So first things first, and I'll talk my way through this, but it will be very quick. And I do suggest, if you're technical, you can follow along. It'll make a lot of sense to you. If you're not technical, just wait until the next segment. So I'm going to highlight all of the data by hitting Control A. I'm going to go to Transform, and I'm going to detect the data types. So it's automatically going to say, well, this column that looks like a date is now actually cast as a date. And we can see that up the top here with a little calendar. And likewise above the confirmed cases, we see a number as well. So what I'm going to do now is the advanced part. I'm going to actually get yesterday's date. And for those of you who are technical, I'm going to join this table onto itself to get the previous data. In Excel lingo, I'm going to do a VLOOKUP on this data to get the previous day's data. So I'm going to actually say, for here, I'm going to say date.add days to the date. We're going to add, let's say 1 day. So we want the date plus 1. And there we go. So now we've added a column of the next day. And now this is where the magic happens. We're going to do that Excel VLOOKUP, or if you're from a SQL background, we're going to do that inner join. And in Power Query, we call this a merge. So let's click that. So I'm going to take my table in the background. I'm going to join it to itself, so the same table. I'm going to join province, country, and date. Joins to province, country, and date plus 1. And press OK. And now what we see is, and we'll call this column previous day, just so we know what it is, previous day. And so now I'm going to click the magic button again, and I'm going to expand the previous day's confirmed cases, deaths, and recovered. And as I said before, to figure out what happened on that day, you simply subtract the current day's confirmed from the previous day's confirmed. And that will tell you how many confirmed cases were on that individual day. For example, we see a lot of 5s here and a lot of 5s here. That tells me that actually nothing happened on that day. There wasn't an update. And I also realized I still have my classes applied for Australia and New Zealand. So another cool feature about steps is I can actually go back in time. I can go back in time to that step and I can remove that filter. So I'm going to remove that, press OK. And when I go back forward in time in my steps, it remembers everything still works. And here I am. So I'm going to add 3 more columns that calculate the current day's actual cases, deaths, and recoveries. So I call this one actual cases. And I'll go through this quite quickly, guys. So that's going to be confirmed minus, as discussed, the previous day's confirmed. And we get that new column added. I'm going to do that 2 more times. And we'll call this actual deaths. And we'll say it's actual deaths minus yesterday's, right? Deaths minus yesterday's deaths. And likewise for recovered. This is about as advanced as this demo gets, by the way, guys. So if you're following, nice work. And so recovered for the current day minus the previous day will tell us how many were actually recovered on that day. Mm-hmm. And now the last step's pretty easy. All we want to do is just clean up this mess of columns. There's too much data for me to manage.
So Simon, I do have one question at this point. Oh. How would people at this point know what data they should keep, what columns they should keep, and what they shouldn't? Because it feels like you're working backwards from a dashboard at this point for the purposes of the demo that you know what columns they would need, but they might have certain trial and error period with this. What would you recommend for that?
And so that's a very hard question to answer. It comes down to knowing what is good data and what does good data even look like. And unfortunately, that can really only be discovered through experience. But I can give a few tips. Namely, you want the data as granular and as basic as possible. If someone's giving you year-to-date data or day-over-day data or anything like that, you don't want that. You can calculate that. What you want are the raw ingredients. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, yes.
All right, so I've cleaned up my data. I have 7 columns of data. I'm happy with that. My last step is to say, hey, Power BI, these 3 columns are actually numbers. It doesn't know what they are right now. It's saying they're either text or numbers. So I'm just going to highlight all of these, holding down Shift. I'm going to say, hey, Power BI. Yeah, these are full numbers. And I'm happy with this. So I'm going to now load this into Power BI. I'm done with the transformation segment. If you kept up, well done. But now I'm going to take all the work that I've done here and load it to this other screen that we started with. And to do that, I'm going to click Close and Apply. And now what it's doing is it's actually going to that website again. It's executing all of those steps sequentially to get all those CSVs, clean up all the data, and now it's loading it to my Power BI data model. And it's actually going slower than normal. I think because I'm streaming, it's usually done in about 3 or 4 seconds. But there we go. So I'll pause there. What we actually see is the data has loaded. So Gunjan, that ends the data transformation part of the demo, which is the most intensive part. Are there any questions relating to that section?
Yes, there is a question from Caleb, and he apologizes for this being a little bit late. But if he's wondering, is it possible to see visualization of all the data? So I guess that would be the end state.
Absolutely. Well, let's give that a quick demo. So I'm going to make a new page. I'm going to click actual cases on my new table that I brought in, and I'm going to click country. There you go. So yeah, I could answer that verbally. Hell, I could just show you. So,
Sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we get there, we need to do something else. So this is where Power BI differs from other tools. Your deliverable, and this is very important, your deliverable in Power BI should not be thought of as the report. Your deliverable in Power BI is what's called the data model. And that's this pivot table we see on the right. If you think, this is more of a mindset thing. If you think about it in terms of delivering a data model, your product will be very, very well made. On the flip side, if you think about a Power BI deliverable, like a project in Power BI being a report, it will not be a successful project. You'll hack the data to fit the report, as opposed to having a beautiful underlying foundation which can support multiple reports. So best not to jump into making the visual. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, before we start making the visuals, there's one more thing we need to do, and that is to look at the data model. And you do that by clicking the model screen here on the left. And what we see are all the tables inside my Power BI model. In this case, the one we just made, and this pre-made date table that I made, my personal date table that I use for my projects. So I'm just going to give you a quick example of what's happening right here. And to do that, I'm actually going to make a mistake. So I'm going to make a new blank page, and I'm going to say, well, I want to see everything by date. So I'm going to click date, and I want to see actual cases. This doesn't look right to me. Why is it repeating the same number day over day over day? What Power BI is saying is it doesn't know how this one table called date talks to the other table that we just made. And that's what this model screen does. This model screen tells Power BI that, in fact, the date table in this table, sorry, the date column in this table talks to the date column in this table. And once that relationship is made, it just magically works. And so now I can pick any column from this date table. Let's go, I don't know, month number, and it just works. So we've unlocked 20 columns of data in that split second just by making that relationship. So that was the very quick data modeling part of this demo. Very simple in this scenario, but obviously much more complex data sources will have more tables, and this screen will look a bit more crazy. So let's go back to this visualization screen here. This is the main Power BI screen. You'll probably spend 60% of your time here because this is where you're making your data model, and then 10% of your time dragging and dropping to make your reports. So the next step is to really build some business logic. And I do know we've got about 7 minutes left, so I won't get through all of these visuals. I'll probably only get through 3 or 4. And just to remind people who joined the call late, our goal was to actually make this report here. So we'll make a couple of these visuals in the next couple of minutes. So what I could do, as you've seen, is I could just drag these columns into the visuals, right? And then we get a result. That's actually not a best practice though. The reason is, and the example that I like to give is, what if this column here was price? Like you've got an inventory data set and it's price, and I drag that in. It's going to sum price. The sum of price means nothing. It's a useless number. It means nothing to nobody. So in order to protect people from doing that, from making that mistake, you really should hide these columns and build in business logic that says, well, you should probably average price, right? Because that does make sense. And the way we do that in Power BI is creating things called measures. And measures are simply a calculation. So I'm going to right-click my table, and I'm going to create a measure. And in this case, we'll use cases in this case. When I click new measure, up pops the formula bar at the top, wanting the formula for my measure. And this language here that I'm about to type in is called DAX, D-A-X. and it's very similar to Excel. I'd say it's about at 70% parity with Excel formulas. And much like Excel, we can say, well, I want to make a sum of cases. And the formula is going to be sum. We type in the table name, which is John Hopkins. I can hit tab to finish that. And cases. Pretty simple formula. In fact, it's almost identical to Excel. I'm just going to press enter. Now, when I press enter, you'll note that the measure will complete here on the right in my pivot table. And there we go, we've got sum of cases. And now going forward, I can hide this. My users don't need to see that because I've made the business logic that they should be using. In this case, it's simple. It's just a simple sum of cases. Mm-hmm. Now, I also want to see this by date. So I can either click the tick box for date with the visual selected. I can drag date in here, just like a pivot table, or I could drag date onto the visual. They'd all achieve the same thing. In this case, you know that. In this case, I'm just going to drag date here. And there we go. Now we're getting some sort of analysis. And much like an Excel pivot table, I'm going to sort this descending. So I can see the most recent cases. Now, this measure is not formatted. I'd like to see commas in these numbers. So I can click on the measure that I've made. In the measure tools up the top, I can format that measure for commas. And now, henceforth, any visual that uses this measure will have commas in it. And so let's have a look at this line chart up the top here. I've already pre-made this just to save time for this demo. So much like the visual before, I want to look at my line chart by date, and it adds it to the axis. And I also want to look at sum of cases. And there we go, sum of cases by date. Pretty straightforward. And what else do we have? On the left here, I've set this up to be a slicer. And so what I'd like to slice by, and for those of you who use slicers inside Excel, it's just like a visual that you can expand, that you can filter your report on. I'd like to filter by date. So I just drag that in there. And now, if you'll note, this is just automatically changing my data. Yeah, so what we have here is some numbers down here. And you'll note that as I interact with one visual, everything else changes accordingly.
Right.
So that's how Power BI basically works. So the next thing I'd like to do is, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'd like to add another measure. So let's get a little bit more complex with our measures, because I really want to expose everyone to some of the really advanced scenarios that you can have with this formula language.
Actually, Simon, before we get into that, perhaps we could go a bit more over time, if you don't mind. We do have a few questions coming in here. So if you would like, I can ask them at this point.
Yeah, please, go for it.
So we have a question from Terry, who's wondering, are there good examples of what a data model should look like?
Yes, absolutely. Almost always, you want to create what's called a star schema, and you can Google that. But effectively, it's one long, skinny table containing all of your numbers. For example, this data set down the bottom right, and then a bunch of other lookup tables. In this example, my date table. So it doesn't matter what you're connecting to. You generally want to make that sort of layout, but it changes by industry. You've got manufacturing, you've got healthcare data models. You've got financial data models, right? If you're doing like a profit and loss statement, you're going to have a chart of accounts, a GL statement. So it changes per industry, but they all look very similar. They're all a star schema.
Wonderful. Now there's a question from Vineet again. So we have made all the various transformation steps and then executed the steps to transform the data. However, it may not always be the most efficient way to do that when we play around with the data initially. Assuming we will have to repeat the transformation each time we add more data, like a daily feed. How can we ensure it is more efficient?
Yeah, exactly. So what's interesting about the steps that I've done in transforming the data, with the exception of that corrupt data yesterday, ignoring that, I didn't actually hard code date, right?
Right.
No point did I hard code a date. So it's automatically, actually, when I click refresh, it will automatically, right now, just execute my script and grab the latest data on the fly. Yep, so I don't need to go back to Power Query ever again.
That's great. Now, one last question from Caleb. He says, cool report. I wonder, is there any easy to use tool to make these reports an interactive web page or something that could easily be shared with others online?
That's an amazing question. So I was going to address that later in my notes. That's a very good question. Power BI does that for you automatically, and that's when price comes into it. So what I've shown you so far is 100% free. If you want to publish this and have it rendered in a website that you can share with your friends and family and your colleagues at work, you have to click the publish button.
Right.
And at that point, that's when Microsoft says, hold up, we need to start talking about trial license. Like you have a trial license and you need to start putting in a credit card. So everything today so far is 100% free. Sharing is when money comes into it.
Great. Thank you, Simon.
Excellent. So I'll create one more measure. So I'm going to right-click this table, once again, make a new measure. And I've already got it copied to my clipboard. I'm just going to paste it in. And just make this say something. So this is a measure. I want some of cases YTD or year to date. And so this is very interesting, the way this works, because I'm actually referring to a measure I've already made. So what I'm saying is calculate the measure I've already made. But before you do, calculate it under the context of all the dates year to date. So I'll say that again. Calculate the measure that I've already made, which is sum of cases, under the context of all dates year to date. So I've pasted that in, and on the right we see that new measure appear. I'll get rid of that too. Rename that. And I'll add it to my table down the bottom. Oh, and that didn't work. Bear with me. I think I've got a bit of a problem. 1 second, that should have worked. I'm just checking the data types of my columns right now. 1 moment. I'll revisit that. For some reason, I'm not sure why that's working. But that would have shown me year to date on this table right here. We have a table visual here on the left, and I'll probably wrap it up with this because we're at time right now. Once again, same as before, we'll just drag in sum of cases, and against that we can drag in anything else, for example, regions year to date. And by filtering all of these, once again, we see that our report updates. So I apologize for not knowing why year to date isn't working. I'll have to look into that later. But I don't see why that doesn't work. I think it may have something to do with my relationships between my tables. So Gunjan, we're out of time. What I can do is I do have a few, I guess, takeaways from this. And I'll just some notes, just if people are going to learn this technology. And so I might just drag the report that I pre-made that will be available for people to download later. And I'll speak to some of these notes while I'm showing it on my screen. So this is the model that I've pre-made earlier, and it's effectively exactly the same. I followed most of the steps. The only difference is that there is 3 extra measures that I've added, and 2 extra visuals, and we see we've added those measures to my table. So it would have taken probably another 10 minutes to get to this point. Now, as you can see, the calculation year to date here works the same. We have the model exactly the same as we saw it before here as well. It was working with no problems. So some things I'd like to highlight when you're learning Power BI and just some key takeaways and best practices. Spend more time in Power Query, less time making visuals. The better foundation you have, the easier you'll find the downstream work, right? So I find people jumping too quickly into making visuals, and they find that it doesn't work. They encounter a lot of roadblocks, and the net time on a project is far too long. So spend more upfront time making a good data model, and you make a good data model using Power Query. Learn what good data is, and those are things like pivot, star schemas, cleaning your data, making it basically pivot table friendly. So don't have crosstabs with dates going across the top. Try to make your data skinny, clean, in a machine readable format. And that's an experience thing. It takes time to learn what good data looks like.
Right. But there's nothing that's stopping you from starting with something and playing around with it. As we'll discuss in our workshop on Thursday, Simon actually used exactly kind of what he showed you here with my resume, and that's how I learned Power BI. So we'll be covering that in the next workshop on how I played around with it and found my own feet with, what type of data model works, and then using that, what type of visuals will work best for a use case like a resume, which you may share with others to interact with.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
Simon, we
and
do
I think that would
have,
be a good demo because it'll really show using your own data, right, to make your own report.
yes,
I mean, this is foreign data. This is COVID-19 data. We're not familiar with it, but making your own
exactly.
resume with Power BI is quite easy to do, and very very good for learning using your own data.
Exactly. And one last question that we do have
Mm.
from the audience here, Vineet is asking, can we use Power Apps to make these into apps?
Kind of. So you can. So Power Apps is another tool. It's kind of a sister of Power BI.
Hmm.
As Power BI makes reports, Power Apps makes throwing in web applications, like
Right.
interactive web applications that write back to a data source. You can embed Power BI inside Power Apps, and vice versa. You can embed Power Apps inside Power BI.
Wonderful. So Simon, to wrap all of this up, would you have any other nuggets of wisdom or tips that people could keep in
Yep.
mind?
Yep. I'll go through them quick fire pace. So avoid making physical columns to your table. Make measures instead.
Hmm.
Don't make giant, wide Tableau Franken tables.
Yeah.
Keep things in logical, separate tables, right? That's the way data came to you, and that's the way it should remain.
Right.
When it comes to designing a visual report, less is more. Dieter Ram says good design is as little design as possible, right? So on that point, embrace white space. Don't go crazy throwing colors everywhere. When you're designing, have this button enabled, snap to grid. It'll ensure that everything aligns properly as you're creating your report.
Sorry, could
When
you
you're
show that button one more time, Simon?
Sure, yep, snap to grid up the top. So if I turn
Perfect.
that off, I've got full control over dragging this. See how that's very smooth?
Hmm.
Whereas if I enable it, note that it snaps.
Yeah.
Yep, so it's very easy to design and good reports having this enabled.
Perfect.
Four more things. In a big project, make the operational reports first, i.e. the reports with lots of numbers and lots of detail, and then make the executive summary. It makes it helps you clarify your thoughts and help with the design process. Maximum of 4 visuals per page. I've cheated a bit here and made 5, I guess, on the left here, but I don't count that as a visual. Don't go beyond 4. You're adding too much information. In fact, I feel this report has too much information. White space is your friend, as I mentioned. Don't be afraid. Your skill as a developer is almost measured by your ability to have white space and still tell a compelling story.
Hmm.
And avoid using slices as much as you can. I could have made this visual here on the left, a slicer like this, right? I could have done that. But I get the same effect by actually making it this bar chart. The net result's the same. I still get the same effect because now I can still slice.
Right.
But I also get a story as well. So avoid drop-down boxes, avoid slices where possible. Try to favor actual visuals because you still get the same result. So that's effectively it for tips and tricks for learning Power BI. I did try to cram in about 8 years experience. We got about 95% of the way there. But as I thought, we ran out of time with this one. But we do have a demo coming up in a couple of days. Gudrun, maybe explain a bit more about that. You alluded to it before.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what we'll be doing for that one is something similar, where Simon and I will take a sample resume and starting from a Word document, basically create a data model and then show you how to create that into an interactive dashboard that you can share with others. So I like to put it as both an art and a science because you have to kind of think about who the audience for that interactive resume will be and then think about what type of data model, what type of visual effects would be best for that. So we'll cover that in our next workshop at 6:30 on Thursday at March 26th. So we'll see you there. At this point, what we'll do, Simon, is compile all of the material that you've shared along with maybe you and I can work on distilling the tips and tricks that you've shared into a quick little summary document as well and share that with everybody, which I'll put in the description of the video that we're currently on. So if you guys would like to visit that within a day or so, you'll have all the information available for you to play around with. And once again, feel free to continue to comment on the video so we can continue to help you as you're working through this journey yourself. This was a special thank you to Simon for compiling 8 years of knowledge into this one-hour session for us to share all these details with us. So I'm hoping this will continue our conversation, and thank you so much for joining us.
Guys, thank you, Gudrun.
Take care. Stay safe. Bye.